Hello and welcome to the 18th episode of Wahl on Law. My name is Jonas Wahl, and I am a pre-law student at the University of Delaware. On this podcast, we cover what's happening across the country in law and policy and how it affects your daily life. Today, we're joined by a special guest, Congresswoman Sarah McBride, to break down the war in Iran. Congresswoman, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the war, for listeners who may be unfamiliar with your background, could you briefly tell us about your journey into public service and ultimately to Congress?
Sure. Well, I'm joining you from my office in Washington, D.C., where I have the privilege of representing the entirety of the great state of Delaware in the United States House of Representatives. I was elected in 2024 after serving 4 years in the Delaware State Senate. And in so many ways, my journey to serving in Congress for me has been a journey back to hope. As a young person, like many LGBTQ people buried deep in the closet, I was alone, I was scared, and I wondered whether the heart of this country was big enough to love someone like me. And so, in that crisis of hope, I went searching for solutions. I went searching for examples of our world becoming kinder and more just. And I stumbled across books about actually the Capitol and the White House. I wanted to be an architect when I was a kid. And as I read those books, I started to marvel not just at the beauty of the buildings, but the history that occurred within their walls, because I saw that the through line of every chapter was the story of advocates, activists, and a handful of courageous and effective elected officials working together to right the wrongs of our past, to address injustice. And I found hope in that story. I found hope in the possibilities in our politics. And so I got involved working on campaigns, doing advocacy work, helping to pass non discrimination protections in Delaware, working on them nationally as the national spokesperson for the Human Rights Campaign. And then ran for office in 2019, really after years in advocacy, but also after my experience as a caregiver to my husband, Andy, during his battle with cancer. And for anyone who's been diagnosed with cancer, especially if you're in your 20s like Andy was, it's like a punch in the gut, unlike anything you've ever experienced. And despite hearing that word from the moment after his diagnosis, Andy and I both understood how lucky we were. We understood how lucky he was to have health insurance that would allow him to get care. And we understood how lucky both of us were to have flexibility with our jobs that allowed Andy to focus on the full time job of getting care and me to focus on the full time job of caring for him. And eventually, when his cancer turned out to be terminal, to marry him and to walk him to his passing. And up until his last breath, he knew how lucky he was. And I ran for office because I do not believe that in the wealthiest, most developed nation on earth, that time and that ability to get care should be a matter of luck. I think it should be the law of the land. And so I've been working first in the state Senate, now in Congress, to expand access to health care and paid family and medical leave to everyone. And also at this critical moment for our democracy, I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I believe that the only way we can protect democracy here at home is to recognize that there is a global struggle between democracy and authoritarianism. And if we do not understand the global forces at play, the global dynamics at play with this democratic backsliding that's happening not just here, but in Europe and other places, unless we fully understand all that's contributing to it and address all of the sources of that crisis for democracy, I don't believe we'll be able to protect it here at home either.
It's a great story into public service, and I fully agree. So let's get right into it. Before President Trump's second term in office, there really wasn't serious public discussion about a war with Iran. So when did this conflict actually begin, and who do you believe shoulders responsibility for its escalation?
Well, there was certainly no conversation publicly before it began. Um, Several weeks ago. There was no public consultation. There was no consultation with Congress. Clearly, there were some behind the scenes conversations within the administration and between our administration and the Israeli government. But that seems to be the extent of the conversation that occurred. And the reality is that the main reason given by the administration for the need for a war with Iran is a need that was actually addressed diplomatically by the Obama administration when they secured with diplomacy rather than armed conflict, without losing a single life, rather than losing 13 Americans, without having the Strait of Hormuz being closed. The Obama administration was able to secure a multilateral nuclear deal that prevented Iran from pursuing a nuclear weapon. And unfortunately, this administration, both with their incompetence, uh, but also with their desire for distraction and sort of uh, playing cowboy on the global stage. With this administration, they pursued a war not of necessity, but a war of choice in going after Iran and pursuing what seems to be a ill thought out and ill defined war that I think this president has increasingly regretted going into ever since it started.
Exactly. And I want to get more into that. President Trump's reasoning for the war in Iran, as you said, has shifted, seemed unclear. At different times, he has cited regime change, nuclear weapons, and national security concerns. But in your view, what is this war truly about?
Well, let's first go back to exactly what you just said, which is the at least early stated reasons for the war. One was to varying degrees, quote unquote, regime change. The reality today is that there is a supreme leader, the son of the previous supreme leader, who, by all accounts, is both more extreme, more aggrieved, and also more pro nuclear. They also said that they wanted to end Iran's nuclear program, eliminate the nuclear material that they have, and prevent them from ever being able to pursue it in the future. Never mind that just a couple of months ago, this administration told us that they had obliterated Iran's nuclear program. But we are at a point where everything that has been destroyed can actually be rebuilt and recreated. Iran still has their nuclear material. They also obviously said that they were doing this for national security purposes. But the reality is, 2 months in, Iran is actually stronger geopolitically than it was when this started. And they are stronger geopolitically for one big reason, several other reasons, but one big reason. And that is they have now been able to prove to themselves and the rest of the world throughout the course of this war that they have, in essence, a economic weapon of mass destruction, one that is probably more dangerous because more likely to be used than a nuclear weapon. And that is their ability to crater the global economy by closing and holding the Strait of Hormuz. That is not something that they knew themselves that they could definitely do. It's not something that they had proven to the rest of the world that they could do. That is now something that not only they have done, but now they are able to use that as leverage in all future negotiations and in all future conflicts, not just with the United States, but with any other nation around the world, leaving them actually geopolitically stronger, which is one of the reasons why I think this war is a strategic failure and catastrophe, predictably and predicted by many of us. They may point to some tactical victories, things that have been destroyed again that can be rebuilt. But from a strategic standpoint, from a national security standpoint, we do not come out stronger. Thus far, Iran has come out geopolitically emboldened.
Great answer. So Iran isn't really being damaged by this war at all. If anything, we're helping them. And circling back to what you said earlier about the Strait of Hormuz, for listeners who may not know, this strait is one of the most important shipping routes in the entire world, with a huge percentage of global oil and natural gas passing through it. So before this war, the strait was open and operating normally, but now it is closed to most standard shipping. How is this closure affecting the global economy, but also Americans at home?
Sure. Well, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is devastating, not just for the energy sector, not only for the price of gas at the gas pump, not only for the cost of energy for people across the country and around the world, but for all consumer goods and for food. Delaware's largest industry is agriculture, and the Strait of Hormuz is a critical point for fertilizer to be transported around the world. And so we're going to see in the near term prices increase for farmers. But beyond that, eventually everything that is traded in some form or fashion, everything that includes parts from other parts of the world, They have transportation costs, and those costs will increase because of the increase in the cost of gas, which means that downstream, everything will cost more the longer this strait is closed. And again, this is something that was predictable and predicted. The president was told by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz was a possibility. He dismissed it, saying that we would have won the war before Iran even had the chance. And now, 2 months in, not only did they have the chance, but as I mentioned before, they now have this economic weapon of mass destruction that has emboldened them for all future issues and all future conflicts and negotiations. The president has not been able to figure out how to reopen it. The sad reality is even if today the issue is solved, from a diplomatic standpoint, it will take weeks, if not months, for the strait to resume its full operations, thus leading to high costs for the foreseeable future throughout probably the rest of this year. Best case scenario.
Exactly. He was warned about it, but ultimately he didn't follow that warning. Now I think because of all the actions that President Trump is doing, many Americans assume that it is the president alone who would take the country into war. But according to the Constitution, it's not the president, it's actually Congress. So if the president does take the country into war, can we limit this power?
So the Constitution is very clear that Congress is the branch of government that has the capacity to declare war. There are statutes that do allow for short-term, limited military operations overseas without the approval of Congress prior to, but those are both time limited and based on an imminent threat to the United States. The administration tried to justify their use of military power without congressional approval by saying that there was an imminent threat. Originally, the imminent threat that they said that they cited was a response by Iran on American military facilities. Inevitably, that would come after Israel killed the supreme leader. Well, Israel killed the supreme leader with intelligence that we provided them. And so we can't claim that there's an imminent threat to us that we have to be able to preempt um, as a byproduct of circumstances that were of our own choosing. Israel and the United States collaborated on the decision for Israel to kill the Ayatollah. We gave them the intelligence that made it actionable. And so this administration was trying to have its cake and eat it too. They were trying to blame another country for their decisions and skirt their responsibility in creating the circumstances that resulted in a risk of Iran attacking U.S. bases in response to that killing, and therefore allow them to justify unauthorized military force through imminent threat language under the War Powers Act. So that's the first bit of bullshit, quite frankly, that we saw from them. The second is now they are trying to say that the clock that the War Powers Act sets out for unauthorized military conflict, that's paused essentially. So the War Powers Act says that the president can unilaterally utilize military action, again, in response to a quote imminent threat, but only for a time limited period, 60 days. That time period has expired. Now the administration is telling us not to believe our lying eyes, and said because there is currently a ceasefire that clock is paused. That is a creative reading of the War Powers Act, to say the least, and one more instance of this administration really trying to bend the spirit and reality of federal law to abuse power.
Exactly. So while he may have some power to do some action, maybe it doesn't tantamount to war, especially in cases of an immediate threat, which we don't really fit that justification. So in your eyes right now, what would a realistic path to de-escalation or peace actually look like?
Well, I think what's clear is that at a minimum, the president needs to clean up the mess that he created, and that means the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Um, if the president can secure a deal that is similar to what was called the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that the Obama administration negotiated. I certainly think that that's better than nothing, but there is, frankly, no realistic deal that this president that can secure that will have made this war worth it. Um, it needs to end. It needed to end before it started, but it needs to certainly end now. And that means the president needs to be willing to take the a deal that reopens the Strait of Hormuz and essentially reestablishes the very nuclear deal that the president took us out of about a decade ago.
So there is a path, but it requires the president to get on board with it, which might not be entirely realistic right now.
Well, and I think, and despite the fact that the president is eager to get out of this, right? I think he regrets going into it. I think he's also trying to save face, and I think what we're starting to hear rumblings from the administration, from the right, and from the Netanyahu government that that we need to resume hostilities against Iran, which I think is incredibly irresponsible and precisely the opposite direction that not only I believe we should be going, but I believe the overwhelming majority of Americans believe we should be going. I will just say one more thing, because I think this is an important point for people to understand around this war. The consequences are not only limited to our pocketbooks. The consequences are not only limited to the Middle East. This war has also emboldened our adversaries in Russia and in China. China now has an understanding of our military and operational capabilities that will allow them to better plan and prepare, potentially invade Taiwan, creating conflict in East Asia. And Russia is now swimming in new revenues that they did not have before as a byproduct of the rising cost of oil and the easing of sanctions against Russian oil that they can now use to help bankroll their war of aggression against Ukraine. And so the world is less safe as a byproduct of this. A peace deal is more out of reach in Ukraine, and a war with in the Taiwan Strait is more likely because of this ill thought out decision by the president. And I think that that's an important dynamic too that too often gets glossed over in these conversations. So thanks for having me on. I appreciate the thoughtful conversation.
And thank you for those ending messages. If you liked this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe to Wahl on Law so you don't miss any future episodes. You can also sign up for our email list at wahlonlaw.com to get notified whenever a new episode drops. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Wahl on Law.